Hello, darlings. It's Melissa, your Learning Technologies trainer. Thanks for stopping by to learn and grow with me. This video is a part of a series on Problem of the Day, a high-impact instructional strategy to help grow your students as problem solvers. If you're joining us here from YouTube, scroll down to the description box to see the other videos in the series. And while you're here, go ahead and press like, subscribe, and hit that bell so that you can be notified of all of our upcoming content. And if you're joining us audio only and PD to go, then check the listings for the other audio in this series. All right, let's get to learning. Hello, darlings. It's Melissa, your Learning Technologies trainer, here to talk all about the math PODs. Here's what to expect from this video, because we're going to be talking all about the math PODs. We're going to talk about what PODs are, what is a POD cycle, why should you include PODs in your instructional design in the first place. You're going to see an example of how a POD cycle would look and is structured in your classroom. And then we're going to talk about where to find different PODs once you realize that this is a great practice. And lastly, we're going to talk about some other resources that are available to you as you incorporate this into your instructional design that are all available on our CPS Math website. First and foremost, I've been saying POD a lot, but what are they? POD stands for Problem of the Day, and it is an instructional practice where teachers model the best practices in problem solving and help to grow students as efficient and effective problem solvers. Now, although it's called Problem of the Day, an effective POD cycle is actually at least 2 days. The first day, students are looking specifically at the context of a problem as well as what strategies they would use to solve it. This is very important to get your students to take a breath, slow down, and truly understand what the problem is asking them for in order to create a solution pathway that is most effective. Then on day 2, the students actually use their models and their understanding of the problem to solve the task. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why in the world would I take one problem and split it over at least 2 days? It seems a little counterproductive to the limited amount of time that we have in our classrooms. When students go to the question first, they struggle with problem solving and they struggle with being able to understand how to solve the next problem that they may encounter. However, in order to be good problem solvers, they really understand the context of the problem, think about how they can model that mathematics, and then create a solution strategy that they can use time and time again with different examples. PODs are an excellent way to do that. It takes one problem and concentrates not on the correct answer, but on the most efficient strategy to solve that type of problem involving that specific mathematical idea. And you can make PODs even more impactful when you use them as spaced practice. Now, spaced practice is when teachers actually take a concept and intentionally repeat and revisit that concept over time. Our brains are hardwired to forget things. We have so much going on in our lives, no matter what age we are, that our brain just doesn't like to keep up with things that it doesn't feel that it needs. And that is represented in this forgetting curve. Did you know that by the time your hour bell is over, your students have already forgotten over half of what you've taught them? Because we understand that this is how our brains work, as teachers, we have to intentionally revisit that knowledge. That way, the students keep it on the top of their brain. And the more exposure that they have to a mathematical concept, the more likely it is that they'll put it into their long-term memory. And it becomes a tool that they can use to build on to the next mathematical idea. They can't do that if they've forgotten. So it's important that we use this practice of spaced practice in order to continually engage our students in key mathematical ideas. PODs are a great way to do that because you take one problem and you allow students to take a moment and remember, what key mathematical ideas do I have in my toolbox that I can use to solve this problem? What key models do I have in my toolbox in order to solve this problem? You can use PODs during your warm-ups, during your station time, as an application problem, maybe give one of the cycles as homework. You can use Google Slides or Pear Deck or Kami or Flipgrid, any technology for students to be able to report out their answer in order to revisit those key mathematical ideas. Let's take a moment and actually see a POD cycle. What you're seeing here on your screen is an example of a bank of already created PODs that we have here for teachers in Cincinnati Public Schools. If you're not a CPS teacher, unfortunately, you won't be able to access this bank of resources. However, in another video in this series, we talked all about how to take any problem and change it into a POD cycle. So check the description box to see that video and turn anything in your curriculum or anything you find online into a POD cycle. So when you're implementing POD cycles into your classroom, you first want to choose what standard or key mathematical idea that you want to review. I highly encourage you to make sure that you're truly using data in order to choose what standard you want to use. Whether that be from a diagnostic assessment, an adaptive practice, a short formative assessment, an exit ticket, make sure that you have a starting line for which standard that you want to review. I also highly encourage you to keep track of which standards that you're using in POD cycles. Remember, it is highly impactful to use that spaced practice instructional design. So if you're keeping track of which standard you've reviewed on a calendar, then it allows you to see how much time has passed since you've visited that mathematical idea. And coming up in this video, I'm going to show you how you can access all of those resources. Here's an example of part A of your POD cycle. This is what you would do in the first day. Notice how what students are asked to do is to make a tape diagram, equation, rectangular array, and or area model to show how much string is needed to make 84 bracelets. The students are not being asked to find out how much string. They're being asked to model it. It's important to train students to make sure that they're only doing this piece of it on day one. Because part of your day one instruction in a POD cycle, you want to allow students to discuss with a learning partner the models in which they used. Maybe one student uses an area model, while another student writes an equation, and another student uses a tape diagram. It is so impactful for students to be able to see how their peers would model the same mathematical problem. And I also encourage you as a teacher to really put a practice in place in order to save those students' models. For example, you could have students write their model in their math notebook. That way on day two, they're able to access the models that they use. Or you can have students draw their models on some kind of online software or application like Pear Deck or Kami or Jamboard. That way, the next day when they come in, if they have a one-to-one device, they're able to see their models in order to solve on day two. Also, using some online software, it allows you as a teacher to take screenshots so that way you can show students the next day not only the model that they chose on the first day, but also to be able to demonstrate some of the different models that were shown by different students. Imagine in your classroom when they come in the next day and they actually see their drawing projected on the board, or you can even print them out and hang them around the room, kind of like an anchor chart. That way, you don't have to do everything as a teacher, and the students see themselves and their work in the classroom and are empowered to understand they are mathematicians and are a valuable contribution in the mathematical ideas that we're all using in which to learn. Here is an example of part B of this POD cycle. This you would want to do on day two. Now remember, at this point in their POD cycle, they have already looked at a way to model the mathematics themselves, and as well as talked to a partner on different ways in which to model mathematical ideas. Now they're going to use one of those models in which to already solve the problem. And the last step in our POD cycle is the answer review, a time where everyone in the learning community can see how effectively their problem-solving steps help them to get to a correct solution. Before we go on, I have to insert a commercial about using videos in the classroom. I highly encourage you to use videos in your answer review. And there is a video in this series that talks about ways to use Screencastify. Look in the description box and check that out. Using one or more of those strategies of incorporating Screencastify not only makes the POD cycle even more engaging, but it also inserts even more student voice into the process. So check that out. Let me share a couple of places that I like to find problems for POD cycles. First is my states testing website. Going to your state's test website and looking for released problems or sample problems or old test items is a great resource to find problems for a POD cycle. Not only are they good math problems, but they have the added bonus of introducing the students to the vocabulary and structure that they would see on state testing. The second place that I like to go is my curriculum. Every curriculum, no matter what you use, has practice problems and sample problems and extra problems and worksheets. As you're looking through those resources, choose an example that is a really good problem that you like that you can turn into a POD cycle. And lastly, if I'm looking for something, I just Google it. You can Google practice problems, word problems, sample test problems, air questions, word problems, rich math problems, so many possibilities. You can turn any problem into a POD cycle. And remember, there's a video included in this series about how to do that, where I guide you through step by step how to take any problem from anywhere and create it into a POD cycle. Lastly, before you go, I want to show you what resources are available on our CPS Math website to help you in incorporating POD cycles into your instructional design. On the CPS homepage, you want to scroll down until you see our quick access links at the very bottom. Then click on the one that says CPS Problem of the Day Resources. As you can see, there's tons of great resources to help you with implementing Problem of the Day. Let's go through each of them one by one so that you can see what's included. This section is a link to the already created bank of resources that I referenced for CPS teachers. You can scroll up and down to find your grade, or you can use this button to pop it out into a new window. Once you're inside of your grade level folder, you can choose the standard and look through the problems that are available. Next, we have several one-pagers on how to use problem of the days, as well as resources for PODs. So a lot of what I've talked about in this video, as well as some of the other videos in the series, are available with links on these resources. So go ahead and check that out if text or one-pagers better suits your learning style. There is also a one-pager about spaced practice and the benefits of it in resetting the forgetting curve. I referenced that a little bit in this video, but that one-pager explains a little bit more about why spaced practice is so impactful. Also included on our website are a few templates that you can use when planning POD cycles. We have the weekly planning template that I referenced in the video, as well as some data tracking sheets so that you can see how your students are growing in key standards. And lastly, we have our video library that shows the different videos we have in this series talking all about effective ways to use POD cycles. And make sure you check back on this website or click on the bell to be notified if you're joining us here from YouTube, because we'll add videos to our series as we see some of the great ways that our teachers use this in their classrooms. Thanks so much for coming to learn with me all about what POD cycles are, as well as the resources that are available to you in implementing this practice into your classroom. If you have any questions or would like to have a thought partner in organizing and planning POD cycles in your classroom, feel free to reach out to me via email if you're a CPS teacher. Connect with me on Twitter, whether or not you're a CPS teacher. You can reach out to any of our math coaches, our math specialists. We are all here to support you on incorporating the best practices into your classroom. Thanks again for coming, and until we meet again, always keep growing.